Good afternoon and welcome to Orkney International Science Festival online in this special year of Scotland's coastal waters. My name is Matt and it is my pleasure to host this session along with Kathy and to introduce our speakers, Neil Kermode and Gareth Davies. They will be talking the next half hour to tell us about big offshore wind developments lying within the reach of Orkney harbours.
Neil Kermode is the Managing Director of the European Marine Energy Centre, or EMEC for short, here in Orkney. The centre was set up 18 years ago to test out devices that turn the power of wave and tide into electricity. He is also the present chair of Orkney Renewable Energy Forum, which for 20 years has been bringing together everyone involved or interested in the renewable energy sector in Orkney. Neil is a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers and a chartered environmentalist. He says that he moved to Orkney because of the positive attitude he experienced in the people he met at the Renewable Realities Conference in 2004.
Joining him is Gareth Davies of Aquatera in Stromness. He established the company in 2000. It is a private consultancy group working in the areas of environment and sustainable energy. Aquatera has developed into a global leader in the blue energy sector. It works within the UK and overseas and carries out a wide range of projects. It is very active in Orkney and Shetland, as well as the Western Isles. Gareth is currently engaged in the Reflex project, which is demonstrating an energy system for the future of Orkney. He and Neil are here today to talk about offshore wind. So if you have any questions for Gareth and Neil, please enter them in the YouTube's live chat. We'll come back to this at the end of the talk. But for now, welcome very much. And Neil and Gareth, it's over to you.
Matt, Kelly, thank you very much indeed for the introduction. And thanks very much indeed for everybody at the Science Festival. It's great to be back presenting again. I can't wait to do this in person rather than doing it down a small box on a desk. However, we're all looking forward to that moment. What we're going to do today is look at what's the offshore wind potential and really how Orkney can play its full part in helping the UK to navigate towards net zero. We really believe that there is a huge opportunity that's at Orkney's feet here, and Gareth is going to do the majority of the talk because frankly he's the guy who's had a lot of the vision. It was mentioned earlier that I came up here because of the Renewable Realities Conference. It's no surprise to me that Gareth actually organised that conference. And so I feel honoured to be able to explain or introduce some of the ideas that are going to be put forward. The talk's going to be in three parts. There's a little bit about our energy needs and the changes that need to come to our energy system as a whole. And then we're going to look at the offshore wind technology now, and then go on to look at the implications of this and indeed the opportunities for Orkney as a whole. So Gareth, could I have the next slide, please? I said to talk about the energy side of things, and we do genuinely face an energy challenge. This graph is from the Committee on Climate Change Net Zero report, and it shows at the top bar the energy mix that's in place in the UK in 2019. And you'll see the yellow bit is electricity, and then the oil and coal and bioenergy side of things are the bluey bits towards the left-hand side. And the point is, if you then look to where we've got to get to by 2040 or 2050 or 2030, if you've got the ambition that we've got in Orkney, you've effectively have to do two things. You change the fuel mix, but you also compress the amount of energy we need. So we need to get more efficient. And then we've also got to change what we're doing. And the anticipation from the Committee on Climate Change is that the electricity part will expand, or the yellow part will expand. And we'll also then see hydrogen come in. We believe the hydrogen will also come from electricity, so there's more electricity required as a whole. So there is a significant change that's going to be coming. And the point is, as shown in the blue arrow, that's going to mean we're going to need in order to get this energy into the UK, we're going to need the order of between 100 and 150 gigawatts of offshore wind installed. At the moment, the UK has just 2,300 turbines offshore, amounting to 10 gigawatts. Excuse me. So that represents a significant growth that's going to happen. So for the next slide, please, Gareth. So where are you going to get this energy from? And the point is, if you're going to get it from offshore waters, you can only work in your own waters. And the map on the extreme right, the coloured area shows UK territorial waters. If you look at the map on the extreme left-hand side, you'll see there are a couple of things in there. One, towards the bottom in the lower North Sea, where it shows the Dogger Bank and the southeast areas, those are shaded areas, which are the areas in which most of the offshore wind has now already been installed to date. And the blocks in green towards the top of the left-hand diagram show the areas which are now being leased out or about to be leased out in the ScotWind leasing round. The total area of that is for around about 50 gigawatts, but probably it'll see 10 to 20 gigawatts installed. And there have been 77 lease applications put in at the moment, and we expect to hear about those early in the new year. So we're going to see a significant amount of wind energy. The middle diagram shows that in more detail. But once again, it's still the green area is only showing the 10 to 20 gigawatts we expect. And the orangey areas, the salmony pink areas, show the other areas that are likely to be needed to be developed in order to get to the 100 to 150 gigawatts that's needed. And the point is that those areas are pretty much around Orkney. So there's a significant change coming. And if you look at the next slide, it shows really the sorts of kit that are likely to turn up in the waters around Orkney in the coming years. So I'm going to hand over to Gareth now, who's then going to explain more about the ideas of how this industry, which represents a massive opportunity for Orkney, can actually be accommodated. Gareth.
Thank you very much, Neil. And like Neil, it's a great pleasure to be able to address this presentation at the Science Festival, and congratulations to everybody involved in getting it going yet again. So as Neil said, there's this immense challenge ahead of us in terms of producing energy, and we started to look there at the spatial distribution of where such technology may be deployed. And what you can see on this slide is the progression of scale in terms of the size of turbines that have been installed in different eras of offshore wind. And where we're heading to in the 2020s is these 15, 20 megawatt turbines that you can see there are the size of the Shard in London. And these are the kind of technologies that are going to be at the backbone of the UK's energy system going forward. And if we do the maths and we look at that demand for 100 to 150 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, that equates to somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 individual turbines. And if you look at the number of days we've got in the period over which they have to be deployed, it basically means deploying 1 to 2 turbines a day for 20 years. So what we want to do is think about what is the process that's involved in that kind of industrial endeavor, and think about the locations where such activity could take place. So this slide shows basically in very simplistic form how you might build an offshore floating wind turbine. So basically on day one, you have a floating base. And what you then do in day two is you lift a tower onto that base, and then you connect all the different bits of that tower to the base elements. Day four, you bring the nacelle, which is the bit that has the gearbox and the energy production part to it, and you need to make the connections for that on days 5 and 6. And then 7, 8, and 9 are associated with attaching each of the blades to the nacelle. And you then end up with a full turbine that needs its systems integrated. And perhaps by day 14, you're ready to tow to site. But in a facility of the kind we're looking at, if a turbine needs to be released every day, you need all of the other steps to be in place continuously to keep the whole enterprise going. So in terms of space to support this kind of industry, we need a facility that can have that whole chain of endeavor going on, and also have the bits and pieces that are needed to feed into that as well. So just to give you an idea of what these things actually look like, this is a nacelle for a 12 megawatt turbine, which has been installed in Rotterdam as a trial. And you can see the people there underneath the 800 tons. So this is a huge nacelle. So this gives you an idea of the scale of the turbines. Now, we're not just needing one of these, we need 24 of these on the facility at any one time. There'll be 300 processed in a year, 6,000 over the 20 years perhaps. But it's not just the nacelles, of course, we need the blades, and there's 3 blades to every nacelle. The blades are likely to be 120 meters long. Again, an incredible scale of structure. And we need 72 of those to be available at any one time in a facility, 900 a year, 18,000 over the 20 years. The towers themselves are probably going to be 180 meters high. So again, it's not just one, but we need 24 of those to be available at any one time. And then finally, the substructure itself, the base upon which this turbine is placed. Now, typically these might be 80 meters by 30 meters in dimension. And here's an example of just one of them. And again, we don't just need one of those, we need 24 of those to be available at the facility at any one time. So you can see there that there's an immense number of bits of kit that need to be assembled and pulled together. And one of the challenges for Scotland and for the UK is to think of where is there space to undertake that endeavour. And if we think of laying all of those things out and a few more things beside, like the moorings and the anchors, this diagram shows that if you have all that spaced out on a deck or a standing area, you'd need an area of about 120 hectares, 700 meters by 1700 meters in size, just to be able to store and lay out that kind of equipment. Now, as well as the layout of that equipment, we need the means to assemble it together. And what's really interesting here is if we look offshore to how wind turbines are assembled at the moment, we use these jack-up cranes. Now, typically when people think about port and harbour infrastructure, we think about these cranes moving into the onshore environment and putting them on the quayside itself. But at the moment, our thoughts are that this industry is possibly going to develop around using these kind of jack-up cranes as the main lifting tools. And so the cranes will move around the turbines rather than the turbines moving to the cranes. And what that means is that the industry can use this existing technology and adapt it to the purposes that we need. So what could this look like then as a facility coming together? This diagram here looks at a possible concept of a floating port facility. So this is based upon the concept of pontoons, floating pontoons being attached together to create a facility which could take that 15 to 24 turbines at any one time, which allows that construction effort to take place. And it also has the storage and laydown areas for the equipment that's being readied to be used in that construction activity. Now, in this configuration, you end up with around 14 kilometres of quayside space. And because it's a floating facility, all of those edges, if you like, are berthing spaces. There is no place where it becomes land. Now, as you'll see in a minute, the place where we're proposing to put something like this, the water depths are all over 25 metres. So each of these quaysides is effectively a deep water berth. So what that would give us is a facility that had around 200 hectares of space. Now, 200 hectares won't be needed on day one, and we'll come back to how this could be built up in a modular fashion. But it is likely that if the UK is going to achieve this decarbonisation target that Neil explained at the start, we're going to need a facility of this scale to make that endeavour work. And one of the challenges is to deliver that capacity at a cost that's affordable, because we as energy customers are going to be the ones that end up paying for it in the end. One of the other ideas here, and you may notice this little turbine here on its own, this is seen as a power generation turbine that might stay at the facility permanently, so that all of the energy that was needed to undertake this work could be produced on site. And indeed, this could be a demonstration turbine, so that if visitors were attracted to come to the site, they could come and visit this turbine and see the scale of these immense machines that will be providing us with the energy that we need. Now, a concept like this would become basically the world's biggest offshore wind hub. Any of the other existing facilities at the moment in Europe are probably about a quarter to a third of this size. And if we have a look at where something like this could take place, one of the greatest natural harbours in the world, and in fact the largest natural harbour in the Northern Hemisphere, is Scapa Flow. And what we've done here is looked at the existing navigational uses of Scapa Flow and tried to see if there was an area where a floating facility such as this could be based. And you can see here, just north of Flotter and just south of the wreck sites and to the west of the existing anchorages is the place that we've chosen. And this place lies where there's objects which are known as SBMs, which are buoys that have been used to export oil from Flotter, the oil terminal, over the last 30 or 40 years. These are now redundant because the amount of oil that's being exported is so little that it can come off the jetties. They don't need these floating buoys. But what's interesting is these buoys still have exclusion zones around them, so no shipping's allowed to encroach within 500 meters of them. So effectively, this area within Scapa Flow is already designated for a particular use. And by taking those two buoys away and replacing it with the floating mega hub, that could be a like-for-like replacement. So at the moment, this is the conceptual idea of where the port facility could perhaps be based. And what this means is that all of the other existing activities and proposals for Scapa Flow, including the Deepwater Quay, Scapa Pier, Stromness Harbour, Lyoness, Houghton, Flotter itself, and indeed potentially some other container terminal ideas that are coming along, could all be encapsulated within the space that's available in Scapa Flow. So other areas are thinking about similar facilities, and here is one of the largest, which is in Hull, and this is being developed by Siemens. And you can see here a mixture of blades and towers that are being exported from this site, and it's about 46 hectares in size, remembering the Scapa Flow scheme that we were looking at was 200 hectares. And if we start to just compare this on a like-for-like basis, so each of these pictures is at the same scale. So picked out 5 sites across the UK, so the Tyne, Dundee, Hull, which is the site we just saw, Aberdeen and Nig. Now these are all ports that are expecting and want to make a contribution to the build out of offshore wind, and indeed they have manufacturing facilities that can help build the nacelles, build the towers, build the blades, and build the foundations that are going to underpin this. But none of these facilities have the space that's required to actually assemble and deploy these turbines in the waters around Shetland, Orkney, and the Western Isles. And you can see here on the right-hand side what that facility would look like in detail. And these 2 stepping stones, if you like, are emphasizing the point that this doesn't have to be delivered as a one-fits-all solution. We can build it up in stages and in a modular way to get towards the ultimate goal and the ultimate design. Now, as well as the facility itself, then you would need to have ships that were bringing the components from the manufacturing locations to the assembly location. And here's an example of a wind turbine carrier. There are similar vessels already established for towers, nacelles, and indeed for the base platforms as well. And once the turbine is ready to be towed out, there's going to be a fleet of vessels that are associated with taking the turbine safely to a particular location and installing them in that location. Now, what's interesting is that it's not only the assembly of these turbines, but it's the marine support operations for this that Orkney could have a role in the future. And so if we move offshore now to think about the infrastructure that's needed, we've got the floating turbines. There will be a need for offshore substations. There's the connecting cables and the anchoring systems that all need to be put in place. And if we look at the arrangement of a typical 1 gigawatt scale development, so this is just 1/100th of the scale that Neil was referring to, you can see here that we've made up an indicative layout, and the red circles indicate the turbines. The outer circle indicates the extent of the moorings, and you can see the cables that then lie in between them, linking all the turbines together and linking them to a substation, which is then attached to the shore. And if we think about the number of days of activity and the endeavor in installing all of this equipment, you can see the numbers here. There would be 150 days of installing moorings, between 60 and 70 days for the cabling between the turbines, 100 vessel days for hooking up the turbines, and perhaps 250 days for commissioning the turbines. And it would lead to not only 20 megawatt turbines being installed, there would be 135 kilometers of chain, 450 anchors, 100 kilometers of inter-array cabling, and perhaps 50 to 150 kilometers of export cabling. So the industrial and commercial endeavor associated with delivering that inventory of equipment is something to think about, where those jobs and those opportunities could come from. So if we return again to that diagram that Neil showed earlier about the possible indicative development areas, and these orange ones are not in a plan at the moment, the green ones are in a plan. And what we've done now is just installed, if you like, examples of the 10 by 10 kilometer areas around those prospective development areas. And the bright green ones there represent about 80 gigawatts, so 80 examples of where these turbines might be sited. Now that looks a very dense energy picture, and obviously the actual size of the turbines means that any of these areas wouldn't be actually covered by turbines. They would be spaced probably at 1 kilometer apart. But I think it's interesting to reflect on the spatial extent of our existing old energy system based on oil, and we've shown that on the right hand side by comparison. So you can see the extent of the oil fields and the gas fields and the pipeline infrastructure and the platforms that are associated with that existing infrastructure. So although this is going to be a huge and major endeavor, it isn't dissimilar to the endeavor that we've had and used over the last 30, 40 years in terms of oil and gas. So as well as the activities, we're going to need vessels such as this to, for example, install the anchors. We're also going to have vessels that are handling the cables. So as well as the turbine related vessels, there's also these vessels dealing with the associated infrastructure that are going to create opportunities for jobs and employment. So if we go back to the original design of the mega hub, thinking about what are the vessels that would be needed to support an endeavor of this size, and we've put numbers against each of the types of vessels that are involved, and it basically comes to 100 vessels. So this is a major fleet of shipping that needs to be developed. The purpose of these vessels is to put out machines that basically deliver decarbonized energy. And so it's basically implausible that any of these boats will be running on gas, oil, or diesel. These are going to be vessels that are running on hydrogen, on ammonia, or electricity, and are basically decarbonized themselves. And that's another huge opportunity for the place that is going to host these activities. And we think it could be a really great opportunity for Orkney to be at the forefront, not only of that energy revolution, but also in terms of the maritime transport revolution as well. So one of the reasons that this might be of interest is the economic stimulus and the new jobs that are created by that. And looking through the activities that would be associated with a port of this size, we think that it could generate an income of around 70 to 80 million pounds locally a year, which is equivalent to about 10% of our economic activity at the moment. And in terms of jobs, it would be probably create between 1,000 and 1,500 new jobs. So that's, again, equivalent to about 10% of our working population at the present time. So what we're looking at here is an endeavor that could add 10% to the economy, and indeed a significant increase perhaps in the number of people living in Orkney, because the jobs are going to come from attracting people, not just from the people that are already here. Now, any endeavor like this, any industrial endeavor, needs to think about the environmental sensitivities. And all of us within Orkney know how precious Scapa Flow is and all of the species that use Scapa Flow at the moment. But the point is that all of these species use Scapa Flow in its existing industrialized state, with the flotter oil terminal, with the fish farming, with the anchorages, with the tourism and the ferries, and the other endeavors that go on in Scapa Flow. So although it's an incredibly rich ecosystem, it isn't necessarily acutely sensitive to industrial activity and disturbance, because it's coped with that and been used to that over decades and even longer before that. And one of the other features of Scapa Flow is that because it has been such a strategic hub for such a long time, we know an awful lot about the conditions and the species and the activities that go on within it. And so it's a very well studied area, and the pathway to go through the various processes for planning and permitting would be greatly helped by the availability of that data. And the important thing is that it then helps make good decisions about where and how activities can be done and what time of year they might be most appropriate, so that you can avoid conflicts rather than going into a situation where you have residual conflicts. So that combination of being aware of the sensitivities and having the data that allows us to manage those is absolutely key to the success of this activity. And just to get towards the end here is thinking about the wider sustainability credentials of this endeavour. You know, Orkney as a community has benefited hugely from the oil era in the last 30 or 40 years. And you know, we had the biggest carbon footprint per head in the 1990s of any part of the UK because of the amount of energy we use for heating, for transport. And over the last 2 decades, we've taken great strides to look at how we can decarbonize our own economy, but also make a contribution to that wider decarbonisation agenda. And that's a very Orkney thing to do. It's about collectively going through an endeavour, creating a better future and learning from the past of how we've done things before. So this is something which goes beyond Orkney's boundaries potentially to not only address our own energy needs, but also to think about the wider needs of the UK. So Scapa Flow, coming back to its uniqueness. Scapa Flow, as I said, is the biggest natural harbour in the Northern Hemisphere. It's got the right capacity. The community arguably has the right vision to deliver this, and it's therefore the right place in proximity to the development areas for making this contribution to the UK's net zero success. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, both Neil and Gareth, for this absolutely fascinating presentation. I think there's a lot of detail. A lot of people will be looking out of their window, trying to see if they can spot that particular patch of Scapa Flow from their house and wondering whether soon they'll see some pontoons replacing those 2 buoys in the middle of Scapa Flow. There's lots of questions coming in, a lot of them centering on the wider manufacturing value chain that you've been describing, particularly in terms of, of course, the facilities you were describing are particularly to do with the assembly and deployment of turbines. But you also mentioned some of the places where some of these bits, so the blades and the towers and other things will be manufactured. Do you see how global is that value chain? Is it mainly going to be manufactured in other places in the UK? How do you see all that shipping actually coming in? What's the environmental impact, perhaps, of all of that traffic, more than the facility itself? So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, are you happy for me to start, Neil?
Yeah, crack on, go.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely key. So, it's perhaps no surprise to learn that the UK, at an institutional level, is very interested in making sure that as many jobs as possible associated with this endeavour are located in the UK. And one of the challenges is that if we don't have a final assembly point in the UK, it's going to be much, much easier for those jobs to fall outside the UK. So having a base like this in Scapa Flow would help support the UK supply chain and make that more competitive against our competitors. If it doesn't happen in Scapa Flow, the next best places are perhaps places like Rotterdam or Norway or into the Baltic, where frankly there's different supply chains that would get involved in it. Now it's not just about jobs, it is about carbon as well, and transporting equipment as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. And it's also a structural question as well. Turbines, once they're constructed, are designed to sit in one place, and the design of the joints and the structures is based on that premise. The longer that you have to tow it, which is a totally different set of dynamics, the more structural design you have to put into that process as well, and that makes the turbines more expensive. So for a number of different reasons, having the ultimate assembly point as close as possible to the deployment is a really strong argument, and we need the capacity to be able to do that, and Scapa Flow is just simply the only place with the capacity to undertake that endeavour.
If we could just come in on that as well. I mean, where we choose to make this stuff is very much an industrial strategy choice, but by government to a large extent. What we do know is that the energy is in the water here, and we do know that we're going to need the energy. So if you start from the premise that you're going to use it, you then work back to where's the best place to make this stuff. Now, one of the photographs that Gareth showed of some of those towers standing aboard a boat, I think those towers are actually imported from Vietnam. So sometimes we will actually cart this stuff around the world, but some of this stuff will actually be built very, very locally. And the UK's got some serious choices it wants to make here. And if I can take this slightly off topic, but I think it's a good illustration, you'll hear more about this in the Orbital Marine Power presentation later on today. You know, they've built something, a tidal turbine, which has got 80% local UK content. The anchors came from Wales, the blades came from Southampton, the steel was Scottish steel, and it's manufactured in Dundee. You know, we can choose where we want to do that. We can't choose where the wind is. So the point is to focus on who needs to make the choice to make this happen, rather than wring our hands and worry about why it didn't at a later date. So I think we need to be on a front foot here and see this as an opportunity.
Fascinating, yeah, thank you. We've got another question here from Martin. He's asking about if have you thought any at all about deteriorating sea conditions? You know, more storms are happening, like we hear far more often these days about storms occurring. Is there any kind of predictions about how this will potentially affect the project?
Do you want to touch that initially, or should I touch on something there? Yeah, so the point is that there are two parts to that. One is the turbines that are going to be installed will be in stormier seas. We know that due to the more energy in the atmosphere. But the loads that are associated quite often with the generation of these machines is often associated with, the loads on the machines is a function of them of generating. So actually you can shed a lot of load by turning the turbines off if you really had to. So you can get back inside some of the performance envelope. That's one part. It's not always the case, but in a lot of the cases it is. And the second part is that we shouldn't forget the Scapa flows by definition and anchorage. You know, we don't get really long waves. You will not get the big wave fetch that will tend to destroy large structures because within the flow. Now we know it blows like anything. We've all been there. But the point is that although it howls a lot and makes a lot of noise, it's not actually, the seas are not that damaging, which is why we're not really trying to do wave energy inside Scapa Flow. You know, it's an anchorage. So we don't really see that the loads that will be on the structure as that extreme, to be perfectly honest. Gareth, is that a reasonable assessment?
That's fine. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think Scapa, as you said, it's the perfect place to do it. I'm in my mind when I read that question from Martin, I was thinking, you know, there might well be a backlog of things not being able to either be delivered into Scapa or things just sitting in Scapa for a while because you're not actually able to take them out. And how do you manage that? I guess it's a big question.
Well, I think that's the beauty of this as a modular system, which means that if during the first couple of years we discover that during the winters there tends to be more of a backlog, there's a choke in the production process, you end up with a load of towers and where are we going to put them, you can effectively put more pontoons in. It's quite easy to add another line of pontoons if you really had to, but actually that's more a sort of a system optimization process. Which is doable, and the point is we've got 20 years or so to perfect this. You know, you can get it right at the start, and as things change you can flex it. And I think the advantage of this approach is that flexibility to deal with the unforeseen circumstances.
I think another point there, Neil, and you know, you and I have both seen this, is about the expertise and the competence of the teams that are taking things to sea. And one of the, you know, Orkney is never a place, well, it's going to be very difficult for it to be a place where welding and steel making and all these things become a part of our economy. But the maritime skills are already well established. We have over 600 mariners in Orkney. So the idea of having Orcadians going out on boats, skippering boats, handling the boats to deliver these things, it gives the industry the best chance of success, because for Orcadians, working in harsh conditions is a daily occurrence. It's not a surprise. And we've seen boats come up from Holland or the Baltic or other places. And frankly, the people are just scared to death. They've never seen seas like we have here. But when you live with it, you grow up with it, you learn how to respect it and how to make it work for you. That's the key to it. And this is a major contribution that the Orkney supply chain can make to the success of the industry. But we have to make that case. We have to engage with people, and we need the support of the whole system to show that we've got a contribution to make. And the same is true with the environmental side, actually, which I will, talk about as well. There's no better knowledge of the ecosystem around Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles than the people that live here. So let's get them engaged in that endeavour to plan out where best to do it, because these things can't go everywhere. We need to think about the fishing, the shipping, the wildlife, the tourism, all the other things that we do, and make sure that this endeavour, despite it being huge, doesn't actually destroy everything else that's on around it. There's a sweet spot there.
Yeah, I think we've actually got a bit of a follow-up question here from Howie. What specific skills will be needed from young Orcadians looking to take up these opportunities with the working on the ships and that?
In a way, there's an easy question there, Howie, which is to say so many, it's impossible to really pick out any one. I do think that if you think about the maritime theme, most of the jobs are either, in terms of numbers, the port itself, we think, would have about 150 jobs associated with it. The crane barges would probably have another 150 jobs associated with them. But it's that 100 vessel fleet that are going backwards and forwards out at sea. That's where there's maybe going to be 500 at sea jobs. So if you think of skippers, officers on deck, engineers, deckhands, cooks, all of these people are going to be the ones that are on the boat. But the other thing for us to all think about is that we've talked about the decarbonisation of vessels. There may also be a degree of automation that's associated with this endeavour as well, because we're all going to have to get used to the fact that autonomous vehicles, autonomous ships, maybe even autonomous aircraft are going to be part of our lives in the future. And within the 20 years that we've got ahead of us, that may become a part of it. So electronic engineering, dealing with robotics and computational skills, handling data, that's going to probably be the jobs of the future. I'm beginning to sound like an old man now, but yeah, that's the reality.
I think the next question sort of lends itself, and it's also been, there was one of the viewers have already sort of anticipated this. So effectively, with this many jobs, right? You were talking about a big expansion of Orkney population potentially. So I think the question is like, what kind of community planning and community development needs to happen alongside this? Similarly, it has been done when the oil was first sort of introduced to Flota and with some of the other sort of development projects. So any ideas as to how is the mainland Orkney going to be able to manage the influx of people and resources coming in through this project?
Well, the joy is that the local plan is in the process of being consulted upon to be drafted shortly, so we have a chance to shape this. So that's really unusual, because 9 times out of 10 you usually find the plan was published last year. So this is nice that we're actually ahead of the plan for a change. And we shouldn't forget the population of Orkney used to be higher than this in the past anyway. So we definitely have got some opportunities that we need to design. And somebody once said, if you want to best understand the future, then invent it. And I think there's a piece here about us choosing to shape what we want to do. So, for example, if we leave it to the last minute and then decide we have to have porter cabin city because we're in a rush, that would be such a shame. Whereas if we chose to build houses which are themselves environmentally sensitive, energy efficient, in the right place, with solar on the roof, and don't add to our energy demands, we've got the time to do this. And none of that involves having to do something that's uninvented. So I think we do have the choice to recognize that this is an opportunity, but to be perfectly honest, I think we need to make sure it's done on our terms. We don't want somebody to parachute in from Basingstoke and tell us how to run our lives. What we want to do is design what the Orkney community needs to do to make the most of this opportunity in just the same way it made the most of the opportunities of the herring industry, of trade, of the Navy turning up, and other renewables things going on. So I think this is great. This is a chance for us to choose how we want to do this.
And I think just a very quick comment on the end of that is that there's been a comment recently that after COVID or pre-COVID, if you were wanting somebody to move here, you needed to give them a house and a job. But the advent of remote working means that now you just need to give them a house because you can work on any job remotely or however you need to do it. The flexibility has just transformed things. So the importance there is that it's not just about Scapa Flow and Kirkwall and Stromness and St Margaret's Hope. It's about all the outlying communities and the outlying islands. And back to Neil's point, we need to create a future whereas if this happens, it helps Flotter, it helps Hoy, it helps Shappamsea and Stronsea and Sandy and Westray and North Ronaldsea and all these other island communities as well, because we've got the best opportunity ever to do that. We've lived through a lot of experiences. Let's apply that learning and make the future better.
That's fantastic to hear. It's really, that sounds great. We've got one more question here from YouTube as well. It seems that this year the world has suddenly woken up to climate change. Do you think that things will suddenly start to move very fast with offshore wind as a result?
So I think they're already moving quite fast. There was a process in England recently where the Crown Estate there went through a leasing round, and the amount of interest and the revenues that generated actually were so amazingly more than they'd anticipated that they actually delayed the ScotWind round to make sure that they had the right premise there. So the 77 applicants for the ScotWind round, I think, indicate that there's extremely strong commercial interest in this. The challenge with pace and need, and it goes back to Neil's point, is that are all of those 77 developers engaged with the Orkney community, the Shetland community, the West Isles community, and understand what our community contribution can be and what would be a sensible way of developing things? And I think the answer would be that they may have started to engage them, but there hasn't been anything like the amount of engagement that we need. So, there is a key question there, not only about the pace and the realization of need, but it's absolutely important that we implement it in the right way. And that's up to us as a host community as much as it is to the people that want to come here. We have to be very clear as a community about what we want, how we want it delivered, what we can contribute, and what we expect from people. And this is one of the reasons to do this talk today, is to start that discussion and hope that, as Neil said, we've got a really detailed planning process that's going to be taking place over the next 18 months. There's going to be the awards of the leases. We need to start a community-wide conversation. Think about all the things we want, the things we don't want, map that out into a plan, and take that forward, and recognize it is going to be tough sometimes. There's going to be some questions where we don't have total agreement, and there's going to be people that think one thing and other people think another thing. But it's much better for us to resolve those and get to as better consensus as we can. So I think those are the things for me.
I can't disagree with that at all. I think it's critically important that we understand what we would like to see, and I would suggest that the developers who want to come and do things, if they know what it is the community want, they're more likely to give it to them. If they've got to sit there and guess, you've got a 50-50 chance of being wrong anyway. So why take that risk? My experience in the past of working with the Environment Agency was that when housing developers sought to try and build on land, it was always better received if they built what the community wanted. And so this is where I think we have an opportunity to build on the welcoming and the intelligent approach that I've seen Orkney take in so many other things, which is, okay, that's interesting. How can we make this work for us as well as making it work for the other person, rather than protective or not invented here or anything like that? And I genuinely think this is the opportunity that was presented to our forebears when the Navy rocked up, and indeed when Flotta was thought about, and all these other things. And this is our turn.
Excellent. I think at this brilliant point, I think we should probably close for today. And thank you very, very much, both Neil and Gareth, for this fascinating presentation, as well as all the clarifications. And I'm sure there'll be more debate and discussion, both within the community as well as part of the Science Festival. Neil's already sort of indicated there'll be more events discussing various sort of renewable energy systems, and as well as their sort of community angle. So thank you, and thanks to the Science Festival technical team, who behind the scenes were working very hard to make sure that all of this was actually working, and all of us were there, and you could hear us and see us and be part of this discussion. And thank you, of course, to all of you joining us this afternoon.
Our next event will be at 5 o'clock and on film. We will be continuing with the renewable energy theme. We're hearing from some of the staff at Orbital Marine Power about living and working in Orkney, and on the development of the world's most powerful tidal turbine.
Also, if you are enjoying the festival, please do consider donating. Full details on how to do that are below. And don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and follow our YouTube channel. And remember, the Festival Club will open this evening at 9:30 to maybe discuss some of these interesting themes that were raised on the first day of the Orkney Science Festival with various speakers and contributors. But for now, this is all from us. So thank you so much, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Goodbye.